Hey, what's up, YouTube? This is Juggernaut44 coming back at you with another old school comic book review. Today I'm going to be reviewing for you Punisher number 53 through 62. This is the story arc that's notoriously talked bad about as a low point in the Punisher's history, because this is the story arc that features the story of the Punisher turning into a black guy. I was always intrigued by this because I'm black myself and a Punisher fan, so I always wanted to know, how did this come to be? So I tracked down these back issues. They are written by Mike Baron, drawn by Hugh Haynes, and inked by a young Jimmy Palamonti. Now Mike Baron, he's done a lot of Punisher work back in the day. Him and Chuck Dixon did the bulk and the most of the good stories of the Punisher back in the days, before Garth Ennis. And this story has some problems, and I'm gonna point them out to you. Issue number 53 starts out with the Punisher trying to do a drug bust and gang info on a new drug supplier in town. He finds out that the drug supplier's name is Howard Nees. Then it cuts to the Kingpin's location, and the Kingpin is in the process of hiring a new right-hand man, since the Kingpin goes through him so quickly. He hires a fellow by the name of George Tan, who is a MIT graduate, a high mathematical genius, and a former triad from Chicago. George comes up with a plan to kidnap Microchip to use him against the Punisher. He succeeds by doing this and cuts off Microchip's right pinky and sends it to the Punisher, and the Kingpin basically blackmails the Punisher into taking out his rival Howard Nees, or else he'll keep on chopping off bits and pieces of Micro and sending them to the Punisher. Now this is where my first problem with the story arc comes into play. Why kidnap Microchip to do this? Why not just send Punisher the location of Howard Nees, where he's going to be at, and some guns? And I'm guessing the Punisher will just take out Howard Nees regardless. I mean, he's the Punisher. There's no need to piss him off by kidnapping Microchip. Secondly, the Punisher reveals that he knows that Wilson Fisk is the Kingpin. So why doesn't the Punisher before this just kill Wilson Fisk, knowing that he's the Kingpin? My theory on this is the Punisher doesn't want to ensue a gang war, but I disagree with that interpretation of the Punisher, because from what I know about the Punisher is he wants a war. He's already on a war on crime, so letting the head general, the head crime lord of New York, live is not Punisher-like. I think the Punisher would kill the Kingpin regardless. But anyways, he goes out to kill Howard Nees, which he does very easily, considering Howard Nees is supposed to be supposed to be Kingpin's new crime rival. He does it in one issue, but he finds out that the police are waiting for him as soon as he kills Howard Nees. And this was all a big plan, elaborate plan set up by George Tan. Like I said, he's very smart, and he gets proven to be a big antagonistic enemy of the Punisher throughout this story arc. Anyway, the Punisher gets sent to prison, and it's not the first time he's gotten sent to prison. He got sent to prison in Circle of Blood, and this story arc, of course. And a couple of years ago, he got sent to prison in a Daredevil comic book, The Devil Inside, written by Ed Brubaker. So the Punisher is like really a Marvel villain. He always gets sent to prison, and he always ends up busting out some type of way. But anyway, while in prison, the Punisher encounters Jigsaw, and Jigsaw ambushes him and cuts up his face for revenge for what the Punisher did to his face earlier. Now the Punisher is all bandaged up, and while in prison, a fellow prisoner who's also bandaged up in the hospital attempts to escape via his crew in a rocket launcher. They mistake him for the Punisher, and the Punisher ends up escaping on the streets. That brings me to another problem I had with the story. I'd much rather Microchip bust the Punisher out instead of these gang members with a rocket launcher. I think that was too convenient. Okay, now back to Microchip. Microchip, after Howard Nees is killed, gets dropped off in the Thailands. And why you ask that is because although the Kingpin is very ruthless, he keeps his word. He ends up releasing Microchip because Howard Nees has been killed, but I guess he didn't tell him where he would be released, and he ends up being released in the Thailands. And Microchip has to find his way back to the U.S. to help out the Punisher. Now, Microchip goes through a big transformation, and I guess this is what I would consider one of the best highlights of the book. He loses 40 pounds, drops his glasses and purchases contacts, grows out a red beard, and purchases a toupee. He really goes through a big character transformation in this book. He gets his way back to the U.S., finds the Punisher, and tells the Punisher, man, you need a plastic surgeon. You can't go on like this. Your face is probably infected and whatnot, and we got to get you healed. You know what I'm saying? So he finds this underground surgeon by the name of Melinda Brewer. Now, Melinda Brewer was a surgeon, but she got her license revoked for use of drug use, and now she works as a hooker to support her drug habit and an underground surgeon to support her drug habit. She gets hired by Microchip to perform plastic surgery on the Punisher's face, and the Punisher is quite rude to her. He always mentions that she's a hooker and whatnot, and I didn't really think that was very gentlemanlike of the Punisher and what the Punisher would do, but I guess it is what it is. So Melinda attempts to perform plastic surgery on the Punisher, and while the Punisher is under the knife, Melinda gets attacked by a couple of crackheads who attempt to rob her for drugs and rape her. Now, Melinda grabs the Punisher gun and fights these attackers off and ends up killing them. But she shook up about the conflict that she just had, and she says to herself that she needs a hit. And she ends up taking drugs while performing plastic surgery on the Punisher. And when the Punisher wakes up to see his face, he comes to find out that he is a black guy. Now, it says later on in the story that Melinda changed his skin tone by using injections that would eventually wear off. But, that this is as you may know, the biggest crazy part of the story. But anyways, the Punisher decides that, it's getting really heated in New York, and he says that he's going to go to Chicago to kind of lay low and recover. Now, while in Chicago, the Punisher runs into Luke Cage while trying to fight off some generic cops who pull him over for a DWB, driving while brown. And there's a generic scene where where the cops attempt to beat the Punisher up for, driving without a license. And Luke Cage breaks that up quite conveniently and coincidentally, which is another part of the story I have a problem with. Like, how do you just out of nowhere bump into Luke Cage? At this point, the story is very rushed. Um, and Luke Cage and the Punisher decide to team up to retrieve some guns and some cash from one of the Punisher's former hideaways. They end up retrieving the guns, but not the cash that the Punisher owes Luke Cage for the team up, because the Luke Cage is a hero for hire or whatnot. So the Punisher actually becomes indebted to Luke Cage in the story arc. But Luke Cage is like, I like your style, and at this point, Luke Cage doesn't know that the Punisher, that this new black guy is the Punisher. The Punisher is going by the name of Frank Rook, and Luke Cage basically says, "Hey, you can work off the debt that you owe me by, teaming up with me and helping me get down, busting up some of these drugs in the streets, in these apartments and these drug hotels, fighting crime around Chicago area, basically." And they do that for a while, and the Punisher and Luke Cage, as you know, go back and forth about black issues in the community. Luke Cage tells the Punisher, there's a no killing law while you're teamed up with me, so the Punisher has to deal with that and whatnot. Luke Cage does come off kind of preachy and kind of like the angry black man in the story arc, but whatever. It actually gets a co-plotter at this point, and they change up the artist. The co-plotter is a Marcus Malari. I guess this is a crossover between, at this point in the storyline, between Luke Cage and his book that he had going on simultaneously. Luke Cage has a new look and whatnot, and they relaunched the series, and they have an artist jump on a story at this point, but I don't really agree with the new artist, because you can't tell these characters apart. I don't know why this artist draws the Punisher and Luke Cage to look alike. Like, he can't differentiate these characters apart. The Punisher and Luke Cage look alike, except that the Punisher he's kind of drawn in a gray tone, and I just wasn't feeling the art at this point. But anyways, George comes back to finally track down the Punisher, which he does by kidnapping Melinda Brewer. Melinda Brewer spots the Punisher and tells George where he can find her. Him. George kidnaps the Punisher, and instead of just shooting him, has this mob boss kind of take a bat to the Punisher and kind of beat him up. And as you can tell by now, the Punisher breaks through and kills the mob boss. Luke Cage conveniently finds the Punisher, and the story at the end, at the last 3 issues, where he becomes black, basically become kind of like a generic rush story arc. I would give this story arc a 5 out of 10. It started out, basically very well, but it did not hold up. I think because of the crossover they had with Luke Cage and the artists, changing up artists, and the depiction of both characters. You can't tell them apart. I wish they could have drew them more different. You know what I'm saying? But I always wanted to review this story arc. It's been talked about through comic stores, and I just had to, see for myself what it was. I don't recommend you picking it up. That's my review. Please comment, tell me what you think of it, and thanks for checking out my channel again.